Hey, you awesome folks! Thanks for taking this journey of discovery with your guide, Keith Haney. You're listening to the Becoming Bridge Builders podcast, your favorite podcast for everything from racial reconciliation to education innovation, justice reform, and leading change in the 21st century. This podcast is for people who love to be challenged with difficult topics, but want practical solutions to solve these challenging issues. Becoming Bridge Builders makes change possible. Each week on the podcast, Keith invites innovative thought leaders to share how they are building bridges in their area of expertise. You will hear breakthrough ideas and concepts that are changing the world. He's featuring guests who are best-selling authors, leaders at Microsoft, entrepreneurs, leading educators, professors, lawyers, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can be the bridge to the change you are seeking.
My guest today is Logan Hufford. He was born and raised in Alaska and married his gorgeous bride, Carrie, a fourth-generation Alaskan. Together they raised four amazing but crazy little monkeys, they call them. Their life is simple. They love their family time, their dogs, and exploring the beautiful Alaskan wilderness. Yet absolutely none of this should be possible today. For years, Logan did just about everything in his power to destroy his marriage and his life. Logan was a raging sex addict. Porn, affairs, hiring prostitutes, and more became a way of life for him. He thought he had no hope. In 2016, God began to change all that. Through recovery, God transformed Logan's life and his marriage. Logan and his wife, Carrie, now lead recovery groups, doing what they can to give back by sharing the gifts that God has given them. Welcome, Logan, to the podcast. We're so good to have Logan on the podcast. How you doing today, Logan?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me on, Keith.
Glad to have you on. Love to get a chance to talk to you. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Absolutely. Excited.
We're gonna ease into this topic. So
yeah.
So give me the best piece of advice you've ever received.
So I read the question and the overthinker in me is like, well, I got to figure out the very, very best one. I don't know if this is the best piece, but it's some darn good advice, and it was one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given. So without spoiling stuff, I had to be in a voluntary house arrest program basically at one point for recovery, and part of that was stripping away a lot of freedoms. And my mentor, who walked with me for 8 years, but he walked with me specifically in this program for 2 years. I couldn't go on a camping trip without permission. I couldn't go to lunch without texting him a selfie. Like, it was really strict. And he reminded me early on, he's like, Logan, you're going to give up a lot of freedoms right now so that you can have true freedom for the rest of your life. And that's a heck of a promise.
Right.
He was not overselling that promise. That absolutely has come to fruition.
Wow, that's powerful, especially knowing your story. But to know that really as a Christian, I think we do that too, not realizing that we are doing it. You know, Paul talks about the freedom we have, but we can take that freedom in the gospel and exploit that. And that's not what Paul means about you can do anything. But it's about, the good things that are good for you to do those, do more of those and less of the things that are destructive to your nature and to your body and to your soul.
Yeah.
I'm curious, it might be the same person, but I'm curious in your journey, who are some people that served as mentors for you or a source of inspiration? And if you want to kind of talk about what made them special in your life and kind of give them a shout out, here's a chance to do that.
Yeah, there's a few people. So my mentor, Rick Price, absolutely. I mean, God has used that man, and he's the guy that gave me that bit of advice earlier. God has used him to be as influential as any human on earth, other than than my wife and some of my family. Although technically you could say even more influential, because he was able to help get me out of a dark cave that I could not get myself out of. So first and foremost, Rick Price. A couple others though. My oldest brother, Chad, is someone who we're very, very different in so many ways. He's like this ripped. He was a bodybuilder for a long time, and he's super, super disciplined. He got me onto Jocko Willink, and he's like a Jocko Jr. kind of guy. you would not think that we are related. And yet he's my brother. He's somebody I've gotten to look up to for my whole life. And he is someone that has been an inspiration to me in a lot of ways. He's someone who's coached me through some of my darkest times without even, I think, realizing that he was coaching me. He's been someone that's been extremely helpful as kind of a guiding light. And I will put out there, a couple names that people would recognize, not people that I know personally, obviously, but outside of recovery, outside of Christian influence, I've gained a lot from diving into Jocko Willink and Jordan Peterson. There's a lot of wisdom in there. Of course, we could trace a lot of that wisdom back to Proverbs. I could trace a lot of that wisdom back to the Bible. They didn't create that wisdom, but there's a lot of good stuff there. And then maybe this doesn't answer the question, but I'm literally in the middle of going through multiple books by him. And so I'm just going to throw them out there. C.S. Lewis. I mean, if there's anyone that I could sit down and have a cup of coffee with, that's impossible to do that because he's dead. C.S. Lewis would be that guy.
I love those. Yeah. I mean, you never know the people who influence your life and how they influence your life. So that's always cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your journey. Share kind of your backstory and tell us how you went from where you were to how you got where you are today.
Yeah. So if you're painting the picture of my life, if you're going to make a movie of my life, I would have the most boring origin story of any character, especially a character who went through some incredibly dark periods. I grew up in a loving, safe, Christ-centered household. I'm the baby of 5. Both parents raised me and my siblings, and yet I still chased after sin. I still got myself wrapped up into sexual addiction to pornography, which then became addiction to chasing after the high that I would get from any sexual deviancy, whether, inappropriate texting relationships, full-on affairs, everything in between. And this, the pornography started when I was a kid. And then as a teenager, I started looking at more and more hardcore stuff. And then, unfortunately, most of the externally visible stuff, the relationships with real people, the physical interactions with real people, most of that was after I was married. Most of that was as I was a dad. I got married pretty young. I was 20. My wife was 21. When I said I do on June 4th, 2011, I had already cheated on her multiple times. And that only sped up. Porn became like a maintenance drug. It was never the thing I was chasing, but it was just the thing that, I would go to for convenience sake from time to time. But I had multiple sexual affairs from 2010 up through 2015. And then throughout that time, porn, throughout that time, flirting with women, throughout that time, inappropriate texting conversations and all sorts of things like that. And I hated myself. I had this double life. I mean, I knew that it was wrong. We had our first son 11 months after we got married. So I was living in this place where I had this deep self-hatred, deep despair, complete hopelessness. But I literally didn't think that there could ever be hope. The things that I'd done, there was no going back, and I always believed in the existence of God. I always believed that the Bible was true, but I guess I'm not cut out for it was kind of how I felt.
So many people who have addictions always tell themselves the big lie. I got this under control. And then it spirals out of control. What events in your life maybe led to maybe just looking at it to actually acting on the things that you were fantasizing about?
Yeah, I don't know if I felt like I had it under control, at least not as I was married. Maybe I'm looking back on it through rose-colored glasses. That's totally possible. One thing about addiction, sexual addiction, a double life is my memory. Like, I always prided myself in having a good memory. My memory for so many years got so warped because I'm literally I'm rewiring my brain. I am rewiring neural pathways in all these different ways, and I'm compartmentalizing on steroids like there's literal brain damage that happens when somebody is an addict, whether it's a substance or not. And so my memory sometimes doesn't serve me super well. But when I think back, I don't remember that it was, I've got it under control. Pretty quickly, I was like, I've got a serious problem and I don't know how to do anything differently. I don't know how to stop. But there was definitely a moment where it spurred me on, and that was the summer of 2015. I had, as my wife would tell you, these are her words, it was the most hurtful affair I ever had. And that was during the whole month of July 2015. And when I confess, I every time I would have a sexual affair, I would confess to her. I would like vomit on her, like, oh, I did this, and I'm so sorry. It's so terrible, because I felt bad and it made me feel a little bit better. But I never repented, right? And so I confessed this affair to her. And at this moment, we got 3 kids in the house. She's pregnant with our 4th, and she's absorbed, confession after confession, right? Essentially, emotional attack after emotional attack with no changed behavior. And so finally in 2015, she gave me an ultimatum, and she said, all right, if you don't get serious help, then I'm gone. You're going to lose me and the kids. And I believed her. I didn't get sober until May 19th, 2016. So almost a year of floundering, of still falling back into my old ways on some level or another. But I did start to do things differently. I tried some things. That's pretty weak verbiage, but it's accurate verbiage. I started going to some meetings. I tried multiple types of meetings, SAA, which is like AA for sex addicts, Celebrate Recovery, which is faith-based. But it wasn't until March that I found hope. Now, March, if you're doing math at home, still not sober for 2 months, but
right.
That was the first moment where I had some hope, because that man, Rick, he brought me to a group called Prodigals in Anchorage, Alaska. And at that meeting, I got to meet multiple men who had my story, who had spent years in porn, years of affairs, prostitutes, the whole 9 yards that I had done, and they had healing. A lot of guys had 5 years, 10 years. Multiple guys have 15, 20 years of healthy living. And most guys, not all, but most of the guys had restored marriages. I didn't think any of that was possible. So that was the moment where I'm like, okay, I don't know what these guys had to do, but I'm willing to try. And in a couple months later, Rick started mentoring me in this intensive program, the Prodigals Mentorship Program. And it still wasn't a completely linear path, and there was no switch that just got flipped. And then suddenly on May 20th, I was a healthy person. It took time, but definitely a lot of progressive victory.
What about that program was different from the things you had tried before?
A few things stand out. So it was Christ-based. It's centered around true healing is not going to be possible without a relationship with Christ. But that in of itself, I mean, Celebrate Recovery is faith-based. There are other faith-based programs, and I'm not here to diss on any other program or group, but I've personally experienced other groups and things. Just going to the Bible by itself was not enough. And that might sound bad. I'm a Christian. I love the Bible. I love diving into the scriptures. I see now the value in doing that, and I know how to do that now. But back then, I needed a rigid structure. I needed accountability. I needed people in my life poking and prodding, and that was a huge difference as well. So it was Christ-centered, but it was also, there was a lot of practical difference in guys involving themselves in my life. And of course, I had to submit myself to that, right? So can't go camping without permission. If I got permission, I had to write a multiple-page safety plan detailing the schedule of the trip and the things that I might be doing, the things that I will be doing, the types of triggers that I might be encountering. How have I responded poorly to those triggers in the past? What sort of healthy correctives can I put into place? Especially things that I've done or that other brothers have done that have, like, tangible, practical, concrete ideas. Not just like, I'm going to try better, I'm just going to think more positive thoughts, I'm going to be godly. It's like, no, like, what specific things am I going to set in place? What plan am I going to make to build a healthy infrastructure? And guys would hold me accountable. Another piece to it was, and this is very different from most recovery environments, at Prodigals, every week, if you go to a weekly meeting, you get a chance to share how your week has been. And it's either one-on-one or maybe it's in a group setting. And most recovery groups, every single one that I've attended, and I've been to lots, you're not, after you share, I'm not allowed to give you feedback. If I shared how my week has been, you're not allowed to give me feedback. You're not allowed to ask me tough questions. At Prodigals, it's the opposite. Guys are encouraged to give feedback, to ask questions, to call out possible red flags, to hold the guy's feet to the fire. And because recovery needs to be safe, it needs to be a safe space where I can share. What it doesn't need to be is a comfort zone. In a lot of recovery environments, that part has morphed into safety gets exchanged for comfort because they don't want to hurt feelings. They don't want to scare people away. Prodigals, nobody's trying to hurt people's feelings, but it's like, it's okay if my feelings got hurt. One of the first interactions I had with Rick hurt my feelings. I got offended by something he said. And this man has grown into, he's my best friend outside of Carrie, and he's one of the most loving men that I know. He's like a dad to me. And yet our relationship started off with something he said that was completely loving, but it hurt me.
What are some common misconceptions that people have about this particularly porn addiction?
Okay, so the way you worded that, the first thing that pops into my mind is that porn is not cheating, or that porn addiction is separate from sexual addiction. So porn is absolutely cheating. It's absolutely infidelity. If I am looking at pornography, I'm inviting someone else sexually into my mind, into my bed, into my sexual space. If I'm single, I'm training myself to chase after new and different. I'm training myself to get what I want, how I want, when I want it. So it's incredibly destructive. To say that it's incredibly immature behavior is true, although it's an understatement. So if I'm single, it's completely destroying myself. And if I'm in a relationship, it's doing that, and it's being unfaithful. And to be honest, these are things, even if somebody's not a Christian, just on a physiological sense, like these things are absolutely true. Obviously, if I'm a Christian and I'm thinking about it from the sinful aspect and the spiritual aspect, I mean, all of that is just, 1,000-fold, right? So that's the biggest one that jumps out to me offhand, is that porn is less. It's like, when people push back on that, I mean, of course, like is the collateral damage of me going out and having sex with a prostitute, is that potentially more collateral damage than me going off into the bathroom and looking at porn? Probably, yes, that opens up more potential collateral damage. But in terms of giving into lust, in terms of training myself to give into lust, they're both doing that. And I'm not here to rank offenses, right?
Right.
Both of them are part of the same, they're two branches on the same tree.
I heard that so this is my question. I'm thinking about what's kind of the path society is going on. And with the shift in our culture, my wife and I were talking about they are trying to find ways where, especially for men, because men are having a hard time finding Christian women or women who want to commit long term. And so they're inventing new ways for men to get satisfaction from things besides women, because women aren't as available. I see this as kind of a bigger piece of a bigger problem in our society, because we're actually kind of more pushing people toward this as being an acceptable way of life, and being so pleasure focused, because we're a very pleasure focused group as people. Right. We're kind of pushing more and more people to these addictions, I think, just kind of as I observe society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just and I don't want to get on like too much of a tangent, because that's definitely, my focus is always like, hey, what can I do better? How can I work on myself? If I'm talking to a brother, or your audience, like what can you do in your life today? So I don't want to get too caught up in society and that kind of thing. But at the same time, this affects me, this affects you. That if I'm on social media, if I've got a friend, this idea of, you do you. Right. Hey man, do what makes you happy. I mean, this should go without saying, but that is just like with porn. That is so immature and destructive, Do what makes you happy. You do you. At no point in scripture are we called to do that. And again, as a human, even if somebody does not have belief in God, just as a human, that is not the way to better yourself. That is not going to build up a healthy family. That's not going to build up a healthy relationship. It takes sacrifice. It takes, hey, is this good for other people, right? Not just, does this make me happy in this moment? And of course, that applies to what we're talking about here. It applies to so many areas.
Right. So in your recovery, take us through some of the steps that you had to go through to get back to a place of health and healing.
So in my program, I was in this program for about 2 years, almost exactly, just a couple days short of that. And it goes through the 12 steps of recovery, but in a little bit different way than one might go through the 12 steps in a lot of groups. Part of that is length. A lot of times people will go through a 12-step group. And again, not trying to diss on them, but they might go through a 12-step program in 5-6 months. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily destructive. It kind of can be, because if I open up a can of worms and I don't have time to process it, that can be destructive. But I think there's good that can come from that. But taking 2 years to go through it was so beneficial, because it allowed me and my habits and my routines and just the ways that I thought about life, the ways that I interacted with life, to take their time. Like, there were some things that had to be immediate. No porn, no cheating. Obviously there were some things that just had to be cut off, right? From day one, there are some movies that I'm just not going to watch. There are some things that I'm just not going to do. I'm not going to be going to the bar after work with my coworkers, right? Like, there's some things that are just going to be cut off. But there were other things that took time. And so there was a lot of getting current with brothers about how my day has been, how my week has been, how my relationship with my wife has been, how I'm dealing with anger as a dad, getting frustrated, am I yelling at my kids? Like, these sorts of things, constant eye. So taking time was a huge piece of it. One of the 12-step, parts that, most people are going to be familiar with the terminology, but making amends, that was such a powerful thing. And if people don't realize, the amends process is towards the back end. It's almost at the very end of a guy's program, is making amends. And that generally involves, at least with our program, that's writing a letter to somebody that I harmed, and then not going to deliver the letter, but getting feedback, having brothers speak into that letter, to poke and prod and ask questions. And, hey, like, you're saying this. Are you saying this to get pity? Are you saying this to make them feel bad for you? Are you saying this to lessen your own stuff that you did? Like, so guys really, really key in on and those amends meetings, those are tough. I remember sitting in with guys giving me feedback and grilling me, and those were tough times. But what that taught me, it taught me to take ownership of my stuff. It taught me the power of just shutting up and listening, because I was not there to defend myself. I was there to absorb what they said. Not necessarily everything. It wasn't like every single thing that they said I had to take and run with it. No, it was okay if I absorbed it and I decided, no, I can see what they're saying, but I don't have to necessarily do it that way. But there's so much value in just listening, absorbing, considering, chewing on, whether I take the advice or not, right? And that, on just a very practical level, outside of the sexual realm, that value that I got from recovery has been so crucial, of just listening and considering somebody else's ideas over my own.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that your wife gave you an ultimatum, change or else. How did you rebuild the trust with your wife? Because I'm sure you telling her, hey, I'm in this program, I'm getting help, I'm a changed man. Most people are going to be like, I need to see it before I believe it. So
Right.
how did you
Right.
begin to rebuild that trust with your wife?
Believable behavior is a huge key phrase we talk about it in our program, in our group, but especially with the women, because my wife got into recovery shortly after I did, for healing from sexual betrayal trauma, which is that's a huge piece to this, the other side of this coin. So she jumped into her healing at the same time as I jumped into my healing. And that's been an incredible miracle. It wasn't just me getting healthier and she's just on the sidelines watching it. No, she dove in. But she was taught from day one, so my mentor's wife mentored her as well as other ladies. And that was one of the first things that she learned was don't believe in his words. Don't believe in his promises. He's given you that for years. Believable behavior over an extended period of time, not perfection, right? But consistent, intentional change. So that was the number one thing. The other part was Carrie. She dove into her own healing, but she like fully submitted to the process and to godly people. She didn't try to control my recovery. She wasn't like, hey, I want like she didn't go to my mentor and be like, I want a daily update on how Logan's doing. And like, did he do something wrong? Did he like, she made it, we had a healthy conversation, the four of us, myself and my wife and our mentors, about like, well, what things does Carrie want to know? What are the things that she would like to be told? So, and she made it clear of like what that basically, like, she wanted to know if I go back to my addiction, like if I actively go back to pornography, I started an affair, like she would want to know that. But otherwise, she doesn't want to know I'm at the bank and I do a double take at the teller, or I'm on Facebook and well, actually I got rid of Facebook, but it's like I'm watching a TV show and a commercial comes on and I wait a few seconds before switching channels. Like those things, people needed to know those things, but that's like my mentor needs to know that. Recovery brothers need to know that. Every time back in my addiction, when I started to make some changes, I should say after 2015, I started to use her as accountability. And part of it was I didn't know any better. She didn't know any better. But that was one of the other things she learned early on was, that's actually doing so much damage to her. Even if I'm trying to do the right thing, I'm trying to report like a violation, but it's like another stab wound.
Right.
But yeah, building trust, believable behavior is the number one piece. Trusting the program, trusting that God has put people in my life that know all my stuff. She doesn't have to know every tiny little thing because number one, she does have permission to ask anything, but also she knew that other guys, they knew all my stuff. They knew all the nitty gritties of what was going on.
As you think about, as we talk about this issue, sometimes I think we get into our minds, this is a guy thing. I'm sure in your recovery work, you've run across women who have the same kind of issues. Is there a different process for women versus men, or is it just, you just deal with addiction the same kind of way?
To be honest, and I hate saying this, but it's the absolute truth. That's an unknown frontier largely. So I've been active in recovery for 8+ years. The first several years, more so for myself, the last several years as a leader, giving back. I mean, still for myself also continued healing. It's like physical therapy. I'm always going to be working on things. Right. But, and I've talked to other leaders, other men. There is a need for resources for women struggling with sexual addiction. And I'm not saying that there's no resources out there. There ain't much. I'm actually going to be going on a podcast later this year with a lady who has experienced healing from sexual addiction. I have no idea what's going to come out of that conversation. I'm hopeful that there could be a resource there. But I feel bad giving that answer. I'd love to give you some great resource. I don't know of great resources right now.
No, I appreciate it because I think we sometimes forget women have that. They struggle with it too, but we don't talk about it as much. We focus a lot of times on men, and there's a lot of support for men, but I don't see a lot of support for women who are dealing with it. So
correct. And to your point, I would imagine that the process would have to be a fair bit different. Right. But I don't know. Yeah. What?
Yeah. No, I was just curious. It made me think about it because I don't want to be a male chauvinist. I want to think about what men's issues are.
Correct. Yep.
So what advice do you have for someone who's struggling with sexual addiction?
This is one that's hard for me to answer because it's like I could think of 1,000 things to say, and at the same time, it's like, but it depends on that person. Depends on where that person's at, right? One thing that I generally would apply to anyone though is this: if you have an issue, if you have something that is a concern, whether it's a giant monster that you're scared to death, that's kind of where I was, back in 2015, 2016, or maybe you're like, I don't like that I do this, but I think it's fine. I can control it, right? Just paint the picture of, if you don't make any progress towards healing, what's your life going to look like in 5 years? And be real with yourself, right? Be honest with yourself, because this thing doesn't stay static. It progresses. And if you honestly look back at your own life, you will see a progression. So paint that picture. What's it going to look like in 5 years? And is it worth it to not change, right? Because at the end of the day, you got to want it. I talked to a lady just yesterday whose husband basically is what was in my shoes. And, she's like, what can I tell him? What can I do? And these are hard conversations to have. But at the end of the day, basically all I told her, I mean, I shared some resources. I shared, like my wife's group and that kind of thing. But I was like, as far as he's concerned, he's got to want to reach out. You can't fix him. You can't give him the best advice and this, that, and you can point him to resources. But other than that, if he doesn't want to change, he's not going to change.
Right.
He's got to want it for himself.
So if someone looking at resources, what resources would you suggest for people to start out with if they want some resources?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. So I am extremely active on Instagram for this. It's not a personal page. It is me putting out content with a primary eye on sexual addiction recovery. A lot of what I put out there applies even if you just struggle with destructive habits in general, even if it's not specifically with porn or sexual behavior. The other thing is, if you are a spouse, you're a pastor, you're a dad, you're a leader, you just want to understand this better, then, check that out. I'm at no longer in bondage, periods in between the words. And what you're not going to find is, a trendy Bible verse over the picture of a wave. I'm getting real. I'm putting out content talking about the meat of the matter. So if you found any value in this conversation, you will find a lot of value in that Instagram page. I put out 2 to 3 videos a day. Right now I'm going through thinking errors. I'm going through a series, just breaking down unhealthy thinking, addict thinking, that kind of thing. If you want to understand and you just want to kind of be on the sidelines a little bit and just kind of just learn a little bit more passively, there's a place for education, even if it's not quite as dynamic. The Conquer series, which is put out by Ted Roberts, who I believe was the founder of Pure Desire Ministries. The Conquer series, you can get. I have a DVD box set because I'm a boomer, but you can get it digitally. That is the single best resource if you just want to learn, if you just want to be educated. Again, it's one-way education, right? That DVD or that screen is not going to mentor you, but that's a great resource for understanding scientifically and spiritually what's going on with sexual addiction, both in the darkness of the addiction and then also how healing works. So that's a beautiful resource. But yeah, if you have a question, feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram. Please give me a follow if you would like to continue learning about this. And again, whether it's for yourself to get healthier or for people around you, there's gonna be a lot of benefit there.
I love that. I'm always curious. I love to ask my guests this question. What do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy, number one, I have to answer this question starting with the idea of having a legacy is such a precious thing to me, because for so many years, like, I'm not a fool. I'm not stupid. I knew for years, laying in bed every single night, what my legacy was. That I am creating pain for everyone around me wondering like how many more months, how many more years am I going to be around my kids before my wife's had enough? How many more months, how many more years am I going to be around my wife before she never wants to see me again? Hating the fact that God created me. Hating the fact that I was a dad, not because I didn't love my kids, but because they had me as a dad. That was my life for years. So having a legacy that is not destruction and like satanic in and of itself is a precious thing. To answer your question, I want my legacy to be, I want my boys to be able to look back and go, my dad submitted to God, submitted to godly men, and broke chains. That, you know, my dad worked on himself. He didn't accept his defects. He didn't accept negative traits and just go, that's who I am. You know, he worked on that stuff. That's the legacy that I want to leave.
I like that. As we wrap up our conversation, Logan, what key takeaways do you want the audience listening to this podcast to get from our conversation today?
Primarily speaking, first to somebody that maybe is struggling with sexual addiction or just, again, destructive habits, destructive tendencies. I promise you, there is not a place that you've gone that is too dark to heal from. Now, there's natural consequences. There are human consequences that obviously, you know, my wife had every right to leave me, and that would have been a natural consequence. But that doesn't mean that there wouldn't have been healing possible for me, right? One of my best friends in recovery went to prison for a sexual crime. He has gone through, and for the rest of his life will go through natural consequences. He's also experienced incredible, tremendous healing that only is possible through Christ. So there is no darkness that I can go through that God cannot heal me from, and the same is true for you. And then to somebody specifically, if you are somebody that has suffered that sexual betrayal, like my wife, whether it's been porn use and your spouse has never touched another person, or it's gone to that level, it's gone to prostitutes, whatever, there is wounding that my wife endured. There is incredible harm that she endured. A lot of women in those shoes, they might be okay with their husband. Like they might want their husband to seek healing, right? But a lot of times they stand on the sidelines and they go, hey, this is your problem, dude. I didn't cheat on us. I did not create this. Why would I take time to meet with a therapist? Why would I take time to go through a coaching program, to read books, to do homework, to go to a meeting? I didn't do it. And this is, and I hate saying this because I'm not trying to mansplain. It's the truth, and I got to put it out there. If this has happened, then you have been wounded. For yourself, for people around you, please seek healing. It's not about fairness. It's not about whose fault it is. I see this all the time, and it breaks my heart because I've seen men that have sought out and gone deep into healing, and their wives they're kind of frozen in time. They're forever that betrayed spouse. They're forever that victim that has been hurt. And it's like they were hurt, but but healing was there and they never embraced it. So again, I hope people can receive that the right way, which is, I speak it from a place of love. It just breaks my heart for anyone, for the guy in addiction, that there's healing out there. Please embrace it.
No, that's a critical message, I think, especially for people who are stuck in that moment, dealing with their own hurt and pain. So that's a good advice to them. You and your wife have a recovery group. Where can people connect with you and maybe learn more about the recovery group if they want to start one themselves? What's the best place to connect with you and find out what you do and how you have helped people through this in the past?
Yeah. Well, okay, so a couple different thoughts there. I mean, again, if somebody wants to connect, the best way is Instagram. Just because that's purely. I don't do this for a living. I don't make money from this, but that is like the funnel that I have. Is check that out. That's where I pour a lot of time and energy into this. So find me there. If you don't have Instagram, then you can check out prodigalsofalaska.com. That website is designed for people locally here. But it does have some tools and resources that you can look up that are helpful no matter where you're at. And my contact information is there. I think that's a button that says contact us, and you can find my number there. So you can feel free to reach out there. But again, if you just want to understand more, or you want to understand about, finding a group in your area, or starting a group, this is related to the Conquer series that I mentioned earlier. I apologize. You'll have to Google keywords, but it'll pop right up. I just did it the other day. 7 pillars. If you Google 7 pillars, Pure Desire Ministries, I think the first thing that comes up is finding a group in your area. And if you're somebody that wants to bring a group to your church or your area, there's guidance on how to do that. Pure Desire Ministries, again, I have no affiliation with them, but I have benefited greatly from a lot of their stuff that they've put out there. So I would give that recommendation also.
Well, Logan, thanks so much for being transparent and for sharing your story, but also giving us hope to know that even if you've been in a really dark place, God can still bring you back onto the light and transform your life and make you into someone who has a legacy that you would be proud to leave to your family in the end.
Thank you so much for the opportunity of diving in on this, Keith. Appreciate it.
Do you know that most entrepreneurs hit a revenue ceiling and have no idea why? They're working harder, spending more money, running more ads, but revenue stays flat. My friend Dr. Noah St. John calls this the invisible break. He's giving our listeners a free revenue ceiling audit to help you see what's really holding you back. You'll get a free 30-day membership to Noah Bot, giving you access to Dr. Noah's 30 years of experience to help you reach your next level. But hurry, because there's only 50 available this month. So if you're tired of being stuck at the same revenue level and want to finally break through, get your free revenue ceiling audit at drnoahvault.com in the affiliate link that'll be listed in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to Becoming Bridge Builder. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at @BKeithHaney and on Getter and Twitter @RevHeadpin. Thanks again and tune in next time.